Hey everybody, my name is Nick Jordan. I'm the founder of Workello. Some of you know me as the founder of Content Distribution. And in today's session, I'm going to show you how to scale to hundreds and hundreds of pages a month of good content. You don't have to sacrifice quality to hit your quantity goals. So a little bit about me. I scaled a content team from 1 to 45 writers and editors in about 24 months. In 2021, our team published more than 8,000 pages of content, driving 200,000 page one keywords and generating more than 15 million organic visitors per month. We didn't build any backlinks. We didn't do a bunch of technical stuff. So my claim to fame is that the reason we grew from 1 to 45 writers and editors was taking this project from 0 to 1.5 million organics per month. We started working with them at about 0 organics a month. 24 months later, 1.5 million. And this wasn't vanity traffic. This was really valuable traffic, driving almost 100,000 paid subscribers and helping a startup go from a seed stage to a $210 million Series B valuation backed by Andreessen Horowitz. So the reason you want to scale to 50, 100 or more pages a month of content is that the best SEO campaigns are content driven, and I'll prove it to you. What I did with Do Not Pay was not an accident. I spent the prior 3 years leading up to that project kind of developing my theories around content velocity. So my very first SEO project, I took Logic Inbound from 0 to 100,000 organics a month. And all the things I learned there still influence how I approach SEO today. Doggypedia, I published 220 pages and we grew to 116,000 organics a month. Campus Reel was thousands and thousands of pages of user-generated content that I helped sculpt, and traffic shot up to over 200,000 organics a month. And then Any Leads, I only published 70 pages of B2B SaaS content, and we took them from 0 to about 50K visitors a month in a year period. Now, when I started to notice the impact of content velocity and publishing more content faster, I started to do some research, and here's what I found. So I know there's a lot of information on the screen, and if you need to pause it after you understand what you're looking at, go ahead and do that. Feel free to rewind too. So we have the website, we have organic traffic. This is estimated by Ahrefs. We also have the number of pages, also grabbed from Ahrefs. And we have two kind of charts here. The first is the amount of traffic each of these websites generates per month per page. And I took their total traffic, monthly traffic, and I divided it by the number of pages that they have to figure out on average how much traffic does each page generate per month. And the results are pretty surprising. The band is narrow. Out of, these are some of the best SEO campaigns on the internet. You have HubSpot, you have FreshBooks by Steve Toth, you have NerdWallet, you have Wirecutter. And despite them being the best campaigns ever, they're only generating around 50 to 2,000 visitors per page per month. There's no one who's generating millions and millions of visitors per month with only 20% of the content. In fact, of these really really SEO campaigns, there's only 2 projects with more than 500 visitors per month per page. And chances are you're not NerdWallet or Wirecutter. So these numbers aren't really attainable for you. What you should be expecting is that when if you want to generate 1 million visitors a month, that each page on average is only going to generate somewhere between 50 visitors a month and 500 visitors a month. And so there's a very linear correlation between how much you publish and how much traffic you receive. Now, this graph here on the right is showing how big of a moat that these brands have created for themselves. And I mapped out how long it would take to catch up to them based off of publishing velocity to catch up within a 1-year timeline to a 4-year timeline. You can see for the points guy that to catch up to them, you'd have to publish 625 pages every single month for 4 years just to catch up to where they are today. 4 years later, they're going to be way ahead of you. And 625 pages a month is an incredible amount of content. It's an incredible moat. There's very few brands in the world that will ever be able to get here. And if you wanted to do it in a year, you'd have to publish 2,500 pages a month for 1 year. And even on the low end, if you look at someone like Kinsta, 67 pages a month for 4 years or 267 pages a month for 1 year. These are really big moats. Now, these are websites across all sorts of industries, but when you narrow down, sorry, before we get ahead, I just want to highlight NerdWallet has 131 writers on staff. So really content ops is all about, content team. And when you dive down into any given niche, you're going to see the same thing unfold. There isn't any website that's generating 80% of the traffic with 20% of the number of pages, except in very rare circumstances. Tools and calculators can generate millions of visitors a month with just a couple pages, but chances are that you're not building a tool or a calculator. So this is the dog space. The data is from Ahrefs. We have the domain, we have the estimated traffic, the DR, the number of pages, and again, the traffic per page per month that each one of these websites is generating. And we see, again, a very narrow band between 170 visitors per page per month to 872 visitors per page per month. No one's generating 80% of the traffic with 20% of the volume. Down here, doggypedia.org, that DR9 started off as a DR0. Turns out the low DR didn't stop me from having one of the higher traffic efficiency scores. 570 is up in the top band, competing with all these big boy DR guys. So I hope you're beginning to realize that, DR is not what makes a great SEO project, it's content. So it makes sense. On the left-hand side, we have a quote on Search Engine Journal or Search Engine Land or something like that from John Mueller. And in it, he says, it's hard to call a site authoritative after 30 articles. And this makes so much sense when you think about it. Creating a 30-page website in 2022 has almost zero barrier to entry. Anyone who's launching a new website can very easily create 30 pages of content. And if Google gave valuable SERP real estate to anyone with a 30-page website, they'd be doing a disservice to their users. I think that using the number of pages of content makes a lot of sense from a barrier to entry perspective because a couple of reasons. The first is that content is expensive. In order to support a big investment, there needs to be some sort of business model that customers like and give you money for. And I think the bigger investment you make, the more likely that is. And I think if you're making customers happy and they're giving you money, that's a good sign to Google that maybe they can give you some of their organic real estate and start sending you traffic. The second reason it makes sense is because, if you have 10 websites and without knowing anything about them, except that 9 of them have 30 pages and 1 of them has 1,000 pages, all things else being equal, the person that wrote 1,000 pages probably knows more about the topic. That's a lot of content to create, and especially a lot more than the baseline and everyone else in the space. And it's very clear that, you wouldn't create that amount of content unless you knew what you're talking about. So it makes sense that a 30-page website can't rank for the valuable keywords that it wants to. It's simply not far enough above baseline and not far enough above the literal lowest barrier to play. But with that said, I have been talking about tens of thousands of pages and millions of visitors. This is not necessary to turn SEO into one of your top acquisition channels. I've seen again and again and again where I talk to founders and I talk to brands. They've published a couple hundred pages and SEO is crushing it for them. So here's the playbook to scale to 50, 100 or more pages per month. If you've seen my other content, today's presentation, there's a bunch of new stuff, so you should keep on watching. So the first thing I'm going to let you know is what you're signing up for. Then I'm going to talk about how to create a culture documentation, because scaling your content velocity to 20, 40, 50, 100 pages a month isn't possible unless you have documentation. I'm going to talk about strategies to making information public by default, what our content ops software stack is, how to conduct effective knowledge transfer and turn that into a really great enablement documentation for your content team, how to hire writers like a 45-person agency, how to delegate editing ASAP to someone who cares more than you, because if you're watching this presentation, there's a good chance that there's a lot of other things that you need to focus on outside of the individual words like revenue generation and traffic acquisition. And then I'm going to talk about removing SEOs from the process, because doing SEO without SEOs is a lot easier than doing SEO with SEOs. And I'll explain how of our 45-person content team, why there's only 3 people on our SEO team, and the fact that they didn't know SEO before they joined our organization. So let's talk about what you're getting into. And I feel compelled to say this because managing, building your publishing velocity to 100 pages a month, you're going to need a team. And managing people is a lot harder than managing 301 redirects. It's a lot harder than managing Screaming Frog crawl reports. You're going to need to spend at least $2,000 a month on content. That's what you should be prepared to spend, and it's only going to go up from there. To hit 100 pages a month, you're looking at anywhere from a $10,000 to $15,000 a month spend, and you should be prepared to spend about 5 to 10% of whatever you spend on content into software to ensure that your content investment is productive and efficient, and you maximize the spend behind it. So creating a culture of documentation is really big. And the reason it's first is because it's very unnatural for most organizations. If you're like me, you never worked in an organization that valued creating documentation. Knowledge was locked in people's heads. And this creates, there's a lot of implications on the choices that you make on whether to put in the work to create the culture or not. So this is a Twitter DM conversation I have with our knowledge-based provider, Slite.com. And what we're looking at is that at the time we were having the conversation, we had more than 1,000 knowledge-based articles. In fact, we had a elite amount of knowledge-based articles, and our team was generating over 7,000 views a month across those elite number of KBs. So we know KBs. I know KBs really well, and this is the path forward that I took to kind of get here. So there's a lot of documentation that needs to be created in order to scale content velocity. There's knowledge transfer, there's competitive research, there's keyword research, there's writing guidelines, there's writer onboarding, content series briefs, editing guidelines, optimization guidelines, internal linking, uploading, reporting, etc. Now, if you're in-house and you're doing this for a brand and you're not a consultant or an agency, then some of these things you won't need to document. Like you don't need to document how to do knowledge transfer, competitive research, or keyword research, but you still need to do it. But the rest of these, you're going to need to document because you're going to be referencing it for almost every page of content that your team ends up creating. Now, I first want to highlight what happens if you try to do this without documentation. The first thing is that edge cases destroy productivity, especially if you're hiring people without your experience, which is most likely, and without your skill set. When they see something new, it's going to stop them and slow them down. They don't have the skill set to be able to move past it. You're not going to publish much content without documentation, regardless of how much you spend on salaries. The second big thing, and this is probably the biggest, is that you can't hold your team accountable to doing something in a specific way unless it's documented. Ask me how I know that. Ask me how I know you can't hold groups of people accountable to doing something in a specific way unless it's documented. And the reason is, I know that because I've tried. You just simply can't do it. In content writing and what we do, everything needs to be done in a specific way. People won't do it in that specific way unless it's written down and easily available to them. There's just too many variables. There's too many factors. It's too easy to forget. And this leads to inconsistent quality and execution. And that's a problem that you'll deal with until your docs are up to snuff. At the same time, all this is happening, everyone's going to be overworked and overstressed, trying to keep it all together. You're going to have really low leverage and really low productivity from your most talented team members, and eventually they're going to leave due to burnout if you push people to perform at this level without giving them the docs that they need to do it. So let's talk about what an organization with great documents looks like. Well, an organization with great docs allows junior level team members to punch above their weight. It allows them to hold their team accountable to executing their responsibilities in a specific way again and again and again and again consistently. The organization as a whole spends less time repeating itself. It spends less time ramping up new team members. This is important because our editors edit, but they also ramp up new writers. And the easier and less friction that they have ramping up the new writers, the more time they can spend doing their job, which is why I pay them, and it's editing. It prevents knowledge from walking out the door when team members come and they go. Writers especially, they come and they go. You spend a lot of time giving them the things that they know, and it's really painful if when they leave, that knowledge leaves us with them, and documentation and ensures consistency regardless of which writer, editor is working on the project. Documentation enables asynchronous work and reduces the need for real-time collaboration. If you can get what you need from a doc, you don't depend on pinging someone and waiting for them to respond so you can get unblocked. You spend a lot less time organizing the work during meetings and a lot more time doing the work. And you're going to see big gains in efficiency when your team has clear next steps on what to do. So you're bought into docs, you want to do it. Here's your playbook for rolling it out. It starts with you. There's no way around it. You need to create the first 25 to 50 documents. The first reason is that creating docs is a lot of work and your team is busy. And if you ask them to do it and you're not doing it themselves, they're going to sideline the documentation for all the other work that you ask them to do. Because the fact that you're not doing it yourself shows them how little you value documentation. Now, the second piece to this is you need to figure out what your standards are for the rest of the team. And the best way to do that is to create the documentation yourselves. And once you're through the first 25 to 50 articles, you're going to have a pretty good idea of how the articles should be stored, how they should be cataloged, and any requirements that you have around naming conventions and like bullet points and internal linking. You're going to figure out what a good SOP looks like. And then you can hold your team accountable. All right, so there's a lot of different places to start, and it really depends on what kind of mood you're in. So I listed out some challenges that organizations face due to lack of documentation on the left, and then I gave an example policy that you could create on the right. So one thing that I noticed everyone was hearing differently was our PTO policy. And you think it's just a bullet point, here's how much PTO you get, but then there's all these follow-up questions on how to actually use it, how to file it, how to log it. And I got tired of everyone having a different understanding of how many days off they got and how the policy worked. And so PTO was one of the first things I documented, especially because I was also sick of answering PTO related questions. I'm trying to start I'm trying to grow a business. I'm trying to keep my head above water. There's so much going on. There's so many things I need to solve for. It's so distracting and heartbreaking to have to stop moving forward to answer the PTO questions for the 19th time. You could also start in an area that's most frequently done incorrectly. And, I think for us, that was content writing, and not because we're bad at content writing, but simply every word of content writing is a liability to mess something up, which means there's thousands of liabilities on every page that you produce. It just creates the most surface area to screw things up. And I also very early on documented my expectations that I have for every writer that works with us. The thing that has the worst impact if messed up, offboarding checklists. One of the worst things that could happen is you offboard someone, you don't rescind their access, and they go back and they steal data, they destroy data, they change data. It could have a very high impact. So I felt early on that it was important that we have a checklist for both onboarding and offboarding to ensure security for the rest of the team. If our data was destroyed and we couldn't generate revenue, I don't think anyone on the team would care if I say, oh, well, I trusted the person that we just terminated to not do that. No, they'd be pretty mad that I let that happen as a possibility. So really what it's doing is it's protecting downside from your team, regardless of your own personal risk tolerance. The thing you hate doing the most. The very first job I hired for was a full-time editor because I hate editing. But before I handed over the reins, I had to give her some requirements that I had: editing for SEO, editing for optimizations, and then she could run wild on, any other requirements that she had and she would bring to the table. I needed to get my requirements in there first. The things you never remember. I never remember my EIN or my bank account numbers or my corporate address, or anytime I basically need to reference any type of corporate information. Previously, it was stored in my email, it was stored in Google Drive, this folder, that folder. Now it's all in one place. It's really easy anytime I need it. And then the thing that's long overdue, culture and values. If you're 15 or 20 people, it's probably time to bang those out. So there's lots of places to jump in and get solving problems immediately. Okay, great. So at this point, we've created 25 to 50 knowledge base articles, and it's time to start rolling it out to the organization. The first place that we're going to start is with our direct reports. We're not going to go organizational wide yet because it takes time for people to develop and get good at and integrate into their day-to-day. Once direct reports have brought in, you're going to start to roll it out to their team. And when you do that, you need to scope in documentation into the weekly, monthly, quarterly, biannual sprints. If you expect people to create documentation and maintain documentation and don't scope time for it, they're either going to have to work overtime to do it, or more likely they're just not going to do it. And it's so important. I always tell my team, what's better than being good at your job? Being good at your job and then documenting it so other people can be as good as you. Someone who's really, really, really good can be 2x or 3x better than their peers, but someone who does that and then documents it can be a 10x lever for the rest of the organization. So for inspiration, I absolutely recommend you check out GitLab's Guide to All Remote. It is the holy Bible for remote teams. I'd even go a step further and say it's better than the Holy Bible. It's like the open source remote infrastructure for remote best practices. Every single remote organization has to reinvent the same wheel again and again and again and again. And GitLab is the largest remote company in the world. I think they're publicly traded. They have more than 1,000 people, fully remote. And their remote handbook is maybe not tens of thousands, but hundreds or thousands of pages of documentation on how remote organizations should be run. It's absolutely incredible. It's been contributed to over the last 10 years by hundreds and hundreds of GitLab employees of all sorts of seniorities. There's no way any organization could ever replicate this on their own very quickly or very easily. It has literally everything. I can't recommend it enough. Because it's open source, it means you can use it too. And we've heavily adopted our own kind of internal documentation, especially around the operations and just like conducting yourselves and, how to make decisions and types of communication, based off of the GitLab remote handbook. You're going to have to choose a knowledge-based provider. If you're like us, you're going to start in Google Docs, but as you increase the amount of documentation, discovery goes down. It becomes harder and harder and harder to surface the docs that you created. And it's because of the folder system. You need to get dedicated knowledge-based software, and people will generally look at Notion first, but I'm gonna say something on training. I'm gonna say go with Slate. We use Slate. The reason we like Slate is it does everything you need to do, and it's super fast and it's super easy. Where with Notion, it has like 100 million integrations and plugins and really, really advanced functionality, but it can get super slow. And you want your docs to be a good experience for your team because they should be used. This should be the most used application within your organization, more than email, more than chat. It's your knowledge base. And if it loads really slow, it's going to kill the enjoyment. It's going to create friction, and you're going to see less usage and less adoption. So definitely check out Slate. All right. So a big part of content ops is reducing friction in communication. In order to publish a lot of content, you need a big team, and each team member is a node, and each node needs to send information to every other node with the right level of detail at the right time, consistently, forever, in order for communication to feel good. What ends up happening is that like half of communication is, hey, what's the status of? So in most organizations, the way that you find out or learn something is you go, hey, what's the status of X? And you're dependent on some other human being seeing the message, stopping their workday, going to get the information you need, and reporting back. And when you go back to the node example, there's all these nodes that are sending, hey, what's the status of, to all the other nodes. And what you're going to do is you're going to shift that mindset. Everywhere you can, you're going to go from, hey, what's the status of, to, hey, here's the status of. Documentation is the first piece of that, but there's two more critical functions in making information public by default. The first one is meeting recaps, and the second one is automated notifications and then notification channels. Let's start with meeting recaps. In our organization, everyone is required to send a meeting recap if there's two people or more. So basically, any single meeting that happens, the expectation is that our team sends a meeting recap to anyone who might find any of the information useful or valuable. And what that means is that myself, along with our managers and most, a lot of the other people in the organization, is we're receiving anywhere from 15 to 20 meeting recaps per week. And they include the agenda, they include the discussion, they didn't include any decisions and action items assigned to specific team members with due dates. Now, this is what my mailbox looks like. This is a 2-day period between February 4th and February 2nd, February 4th. I got 6 meeting recaps. I got one from the editing team, one from the project management team, one from the ops team, and then I got another round the following day. And it's pretty incredible what happens if you can convince your team to buy into it. The first thing that happens is it makes it super easy to skip meetings. I have 1 or 2 meetings a day internally, and that's true for most of the people in our company. Team members on PTO can catch back up super easily. All they need to do is spend a couple minutes reading their email when they log back in on the Monday they return. Managers can watch how the organization makes decisions. It's so cool that I don't have to attend all of these meetings. I know exactly what's going on and I can see the decisions that are being made. And if I disagree with any of them, I can jump in and I can give my opinion. And what I found is that over time, the team is making the decisions that I would have made. And by giving me that visibility, first of all, I wouldn't have attended all the meetings. I wouldn't have attended these meetings anyways. And if no one sent the recaps, then there would have been this black hole of information where I don't really see how the organization is growing or evolving or how it makes decisions. And then it creates accountability for the people assigned to the action items. When you know that you're going to have to present to a bunch of people on whether you did the thing that was assigned to you last week in front of those same people, you end up doing those things because you don't want to let everybody down so publicly. All right, notification channels. This is super cool. This is like one of my favorite content ops tactics. I have like a dozen notification channels that basically just send in information from all sorts of different apps related to onboarding and offboarding, updating internal documents, executing against agenda and sprint items, analytics, daily stand-ups, PTO, and kind of general just PM activity. So let's see what that looks like. So we have a notifications channel for leave requests. And when someone on my team says they're going to take some PTO, I don't need to ask them if they filed their PTO leave request. I can just check the notification channel and I can say, hey, you should do it because I didn't see it there. Daily stand-ups. All of our editors fill in a Geekbot, which is a Slack app that essentially is an async message on what they're doing and what they accomplished in a particular day. It all goes into this one channel and managers can just log in and see how everyone's doing and if they need help. Analytics. You might log into analytics 10 times a day like me, but chances are most people in your organization don't. Even people who might benefit from more analytics in their life just aren't going to log into Google Analytics that much. And so we actually bring as much analytics information as we can into Slack where everybody else hangs out for 2 reasons. 1, so people can see how their actions influence our core KPIs. And then 2, even if they're working on things that don't directly influence the core KPIs, they can see that the organization is trending, towards its mission. This is our notification on riders being onboarded and offboarded. I don't need to ask my ops manager how many riders did we onboard this week because all the notifications are sent to the notifications channel. I can just go in and scroll up, see how many people we onboard and offboard in a given week. Updating internal SOPs. Anytime someone updates a SOP in Slide, it pushes it to here. And this is because I want to understand a couple of different things. The first is that I feel like our docs are our gold. And so I really want to know when we're working on the docs. 2 is I want to know what docs we're working on. I want to know what docs the team thinks is important to update and create. And then I can just click one of these links and see what they made. It totally reduces the need to say, hey, what's the status of this doc that we discussed? Any opportunity you can to make data public, you should. So let's move on to our content ops software stack. Some of this stack is non-negotiable. Some of this stack is negotiable, but basically the money that you spend here is making your salary costs or your content costs more effective and more efficient. And if you try and spend money on content, without the software, your content's not going to go very far in terms of impact. I've broken it down by operational software, content software, analytics, and SEO. I'm going to go through each operational software specifically. So let's touch base on some of these apps that you might have not have heard of. The first is Grammarly. We have paid plans for our editors, free plans for our writers. Google Docs is where all of the content writing happens. Our publishable words, not our SOPs. And then Airtable is our content calendar. Do not use ClickUp. Do not use Basecamp. Don't use anything else but Airtable. Just trust me on this. We're publishing 600 pages a month. We got 45 people on our team. Our productivity would be destroyed if we didn't have Airtable. Google Analytics, Google Search Console, not a lot to say here, but Arc.ai is the app that we use to send our analytics into Slack. And then Screaming Frog and Ahrefs, not a lot to say there either. That you probably don't already know or hasn't been talked about by someone who is really good at SEO. So let's go into our operational software, because I think this stuff will probably be the newest for you guys. The first piece of software we use is Workello. We use it to hire writers. It helps us build a consistent stream of high quality writers on autopilot. It's about $33 a month. We have Zapier. This glues everything together. $39 a month and just goes up from there. Zoom, anyone in our organization who's running meetings longer than the 45-minute free limit gets a paid license. Generally, that's Editors Plus. Geekbot, it's our async Slack stand-up app. It's $3 a user. Slack is $7 a user. You should for sure have your Editors Plus on paid plans, but if you just want to invite writers as guests and not pay for them, that's fine too in the beginning. Airtable's $24 a user. It starts cheaper, but you really need the features like the 1-year backup and the more configuration of the $24 per user per month plan. We only give access to Editors Plus, not any of our writers. Slight knowledge base, $7 a month. Like Slack, you can invite people to one channel as a guest for free. TransferWise, we use for payments. DocuSign, you can use any e-signature provider. And then Affy.ai is our backup solution. We have 10,000 pages of content in Google Docs. If it disappeared, I'd be very, very unhappy. I don't even know if Affy works, but having a dashboard that says all your stuff is backed up is really reassuring. It's worth the $3 per user or whatever it is. All right, so we got our ops software set up. We understand the philosophy for building a content team. Now it's time to start creating individual pieces of documentation to enable that content team. And one of the most critical pieces of what you do is knowledge transfer from stakeholders. What you're looking at is creating a 10 to 20 page document that's going to act as source material for any writers or editors who end up working on the project. And kind of from a high level, the workflow is that write down as many questions as possible that you can think of that you need to ask the stakeholders, get information that might be helpful for the writers and editors when they're creating content. And you want to send it to the stakeholders ahead of time. And ideally, they can start putting down their bullet points and they can walk in with a ton of notes for the meeting. When you do the meeting, you should expect at a minimum, it's going to take 1 hour, but good knowledge transfer will take 2 to 3 hours easily. The meeting should be recorded, and then you're going to turn this recording and any notes you took and got from your stakeholders into a giant piece of documentation that you're going to use to hold everybody who works on the project accountable to the things that you need them to be accountable to. Messaging, positioning, brand guidelines, tone of voice. And you're going to update this documentation as new things are added. What ends up happening is it doesn't matter if you spend 2 or 3 hours, you're going to forget stuff. When you start writing, you're going to go, hey, actually, now that you wrote about this, I want you to talk about it in this way. Or like, I know we talked about writing about it in this way, but seeing it on paper doesn't make sense. Let's do it another way. Make sure that makes it back in to the knowledge base. And to the enablement documentation. Here are 11 example questions, but this is like, you really should have 50 plus questions, and you should be asking clarifying questions frequently. Even if the stakeholder doesn't know, take an action item that they have to go and get that information for you after the meeting. Tell me everything you know about the industry you're in. A follow-up question would be, who are the biggest competitors? How many players are in the space? Where do you fit? Why do your customers choose you? What's your strongest stance on what's your strong stance on the industry? For example, at content distribution, mine was 0 to 1 million organics a month, no backlinks, no technical BS, just good content. So that was my strong stance. How do customers purchase the product? What's their evaluation criteria? What's their sales funnel look like? How do they research solutions? What's the desired tone of voice? Do you have any examples? What are the best communities for this industry? What's the best content that anyone who's working on this project should read in order to set like the minimum level of quality that we want to hit for every page of content we produce? If you think about it, there's dozens and dozens and dozens of more questions that you should be asking. Now, good knowledge transfer 2 to 3 hours. The document you create should be more than 10 pages. And it should take you a good 2 to 5 days to create this document. You should spend a lot of time on it because it's going to set everyone else up for success. All right, let's talk about hiring writers. There's 5 things I want to talk about within hiring writers. Why content cost is a competitive advantage, why hiring writers sucks, how to automate it, what our content team looks like, and then managing everybody, and just some tips and tricks I've learned over the last 3 years. So content cost is a huge competitive advantage, all things being equal. Again, all things being equal is like a key disqualifier. You can't win with this strategy by scaling up bad content. You have to do both quality and quantity. And it's possible. Trust me, it's possible. Learn how. So, okay. Let's look at the top chart first. There's 2 charts, but let's look at the top. So we have the location. We have the average salary for that location. We have the amount of content that they'll produce in a year. And then we have the cost per page. And on the location side, we have San Francisco, Austin, Thailand, Eastern Europe. And the costs go down with each location from 90,000 to 18,000. 200 pages a year, it's a guesstimate. I think it's a little bit higher. There's like 262 work days, but with the amount of PTO, it comes out to 220, but I just said 200 because it's easy. The number of words doesn't matter. It could be 1,000, could be 1,500, could be 2,000. For the point of the example, it's the same for all of them. And then cost per page goes from $450 a page in San Francisco down to $90 a page in Eastern Europe. All right, so here's why this is super important. And here's why people who are able to hire abroad have a lot higher leverage on their investment. And the reason is because you can publish more content. Again, all things being equal, publishing more content is better than publishing less content. So on a $100,000 budget, if we only hired in San Francisco, we'd be able to produce about 222 pages of content for a cost of $450 per page. That same $100,000 paying a British English teacher living in Thailand would get us 800 pages of content. And if we spent that same 100K in Eastern Europe, we'd get at least 1,000 pages of content. And going back to what we discussed earlier, how the biggest outcomes always have the most content, the more good content you can get for your budget, the more success that you're going to see. So content cost is a huge competitive advantage. So I have some final thoughts. One of the things that I hear from everyone is, hey, Nick, you have a team of 45, non-native writers and editors. Is the content really good? And here's what I always tell them. The first is that if you're bought into better content, getting more visibility in the SERPs than worse content, and you know that we don't build new backlinks, and you know that we don't do technical BS, and you know that we have 200,000 keywords on page 1, how do we get the 200,000 page keywords if it wasn't through creating better content than any other page Google could show for the keywords we wanted to rank for? Also, I don't think there's anything exceptional about native English speakers. I'm talking about Americans, Canadians, British, Australians. Newspapers write at an 8th grade reading level because Americans aren't that smart. Just think about all the dumb people that have brought attention to themselves over the last couple of years in America. And that's how smart the average American is. Like, there's no exceptionalism. Just because you can speak English does not mean that you're capable of writing content. Our entire team of content writers and editors are better writers than I am. Sure, I might be able to write, a little bit of good content, but I can't do it consistently over long periods of time like these people can. Now, lastly, It feels a lot better to pay someone in a low cost of living country at the top of band than it feels to pay someone in a high cost of living country like America at the bottom of the spectrum. You know, I'm American, I don't have any affinity to Americans. It makes me feel just as good, if not better, to like work with a team of really awesome, you know, international people and pay them really well for the location that they live in, more than local companies can pay them, than it would be to, you know, hire American, you know, for around minimum wage. Okay, so in order to get our content team to 45 writers and editors, we had to evaluate thousands and thousands. We had to test, you know, 1,000. We had to hire 100, 150, and what we're left is with the best. It is a grind, and it doesn't really matter how much you pay, where you recruit from. There's no magical hiring channel where all the writers are qualified. You know, even the marketplaces that said, hey, we just select the best writers, all those writers are hired off the platform faster than the platforms can find new good writers to replace them. And over time, regardless of their intentions, generally the signal to noise just goes to 0 or 100 or whatever a bad ratio is for signal to noise. And it's not just us. Anyone who's ever tried to hire writers before struggles with it. I have a mini collection of people who have talked publicly about the pain. DePetty, she says, all they do is pick stuff from the net and spin it with no connection between sentences. Forget niche. They can't write the basics. Such a threat to the community. Down here, Boyan received an email from a Cluster AI customer. He says, as everyone says, finding good writers is a pain. I'm finding one decent one for every 6 or 7 that I give trial to. Need to find a more efficient way of filtering them out. Any ideas? Ayush, he says the quality of the final draft was massively different from the sample, and I had to redo it entirely. Any tips for hiring writers, Brooklyn Nash? John Perini, he says, I went through 5 content writers before I finally found one. Hiring content writers is super hard. And then down here, this is a post on Reddit in our entrepreneur. It had 1,500 upvotes, dozens of awards. And I hired content writers from 17 different websites, and most of them were scammers. It's true. Most of the writers are scammers. Down here, Alex up in my DMs, she said the quality of work some of the writers delivered was mind-blowingly poor. And over here, we have a Facebook group post saying, watch out who you hire. Just had a writer try and plagiarize an article and got reported to Haro. This is not unique to me. It's not unique to these guys. It's literally anyone who tries to hire writers is going to have a bad time, and I'll explain why. The first is 95% are not qualified. Just because you can speak English does not mean you can write, but you have 1-cent writers applying for 25-cent writing jobs, unfortunately. Bad writers submit good portfolios because every writer who applies is probably going to cite a piece of content that they wrote that's currently live and published. And live content goes through editors before it goes live. And a lot of these writers submitted an article. It was so bad that they got fired. The editor spent all day rewriting it. They finally get it live. And then that writer has the audacity to cite it in their portfolio, claim it as theirs. And so if you hire a writer based off of their portfolio, chances are when you start paying them, the first drafts that you get aren't going to reflect the portfolio you hired them on. And so you have to test writers regardless of their portfolio, unless it's coming in through your in-network. If it's coming in through a job board, if you don't have a personal referral of this person, you just got to test them. I've spent thousands of dollars on content that I can't use without completely rewriting. But you don't end up testing that many writers because every step is manual and it's super tedious. You had this big grandeur vision of creating, you know, scaling content velocity. Now you're stuck hiring writers, and it's a real drag. You got all these other things to do. And it's like a dozen discrete steps to bring one candidate from application receive to hired. All the steps are littered across apps, email, this job board, that job board, Google Docs, oh, it's not shared, et cetera, et cetera. And so what ends up happening is that you get a bunch of candidates, but you only actually test a couple. And when you only test a couple, you don't hire the best writer, you hire the least worst. When you test a couple writers, you don't hire the best writer, you hire the least worst. And what always happens is You go through the hiring cycle, you're not pumped about any of the writers, but you spend a bunch of time, you want to get some content for your effort. So you hire someone, it's garbage just like you expected, you spend too much time editing it, and you terminate them or they resign shortly later. And you start the whole process over again. Let me tell you how we solved it. In order to scale our team to 45 writers and editors, we built an automated hiring funnel that would make it super easy to evaluate and test 10 times as many writers with 95% less effort. And we recently made it available for anyone to use. So anyone can now hire like a 45-person agency. This is the same kind of hiring automation that all content agencies and all content marketplaces are using. Now you don't have to invest hundreds or thousands of hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars into building a hiring pipeline that's super simple and super automated. You can steal ours. You can steal ours. So the way it works is you post your job ad, Reddit, ProBlogger, Linkedin, Indeed, Facebook, wherever. You get a ton of candidates. You send pre-screen tests to the ones with the best portfolios, and you hire the top 100% of your 200 candidates. Workello has a centralized dashboard, so regardless of where you're hiring from, candidates are streaming into one place, and everyone's sorted by status, so you know exactly what to do next. You know who needs to get tested, you know which tests need to get reviewed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the testing is integrated. It's in the app. It's super easy for both you and the candidate. It looks professional. There's no more sending Google Docs or Word Docs. You know, no more mismanaging sharing permissions. And the whole process is optimized to keep your best 1 to 5% of your best writers engaged and invested, so they take your writing test and you can hire them. And it has insane engagement rate. We have a 90% open rate on our emails, 90% plus link click rate for our test sents. We have an integrated plagiarism detector. Candidate status page tells candidates exactly where they are in the hiring cycle, what to expect next, and how long it will take to stop transactional hiring questions before they start. And the whole thing from job ad to writing test to candidate emails is pre-configured. So you can start accepting candidates 3 minutes after signing up. So here's what content teams are saying about Workello.
Never in my life have I managed to filter through 200 applicants in the space of 2 weeks.
20 submissions in 2 weeks, and I hired 2 people.
We've hired 2 video editors.
We had 140 candidates, 15 interviews. We hired 7 new writers.
If you sign up for Workello, you can test 5 writers for free before you have to upgrade. Okay, so managing writers. So I'm just going to dump some thoughts on you. I have a bunch of thoughts. My thinking has evolved, you know, from the beginning when I was working with freelancers to today where everyone's in-house. So initially, I thought that most writers could write 2,500 new words per day and edit 2,500 words of revisions that their editors had turned in from the previous day. And what we found is that a lot of writers can do it, but most can't. When we looked at our content team, only 25% of our team was at this 2,500 word mark. 75% of our writers were at 1,600 words a day. And 2,500 words was considered full-time to get full-time benefits, and 1,600 was considered part-time to get part-time benefits. And moving forward, we're considering 1,600 words a day full-time. And that means that they also have to edit, you know, the 1,600 words of revisions that they receive from the editors in that same day as well. We pay about 5 cents a word. And over the last 3 years, this has ramped up. We've found great writers at 2.5 cents a word, at 3 cents a word, at 4 cents a word, but we didn't find enough of them, and we didn't find enough of them consistently, and we didn't retain them for as long as we'd like. And so we've raised rates just in response to, you know, making it easier for us on the recruiting and retention side. Each of our writers writes about 20 pages per month. There's about 22 to 23 work days, but we give 38 days of PTO to our team. And so that ends up being about 20 pages per month of content. Now, if you're watching this in America, 38 days is going to offend your American sensibilities. It did for me too when I started offering this, but no, I really like it. The first is that content writing every single day for long periods of time is very, 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 very difficult. I compare it to sales or support. You know, it can be a grind to write content for long periods of time consistently. And so by giving our team the much needed break that they need, it helps with retention and just kind of overall mood. You know, I want to work with happy people. The second is that when people take so much time off, especially, at the manager level, we have to build a redundant organization because the status quo is like 15% of our team is on PTO at any given time. And that means we're really resilient. If someone gets sick, if someone gets hit by a bus, if they, resign, the company keeps on going. And that's really important. That redundancy is not only important for, making sure you can still get paid, but also so you can still pay everybody else. I think your team would be really upset with you if your director of SEO left and then you went out of business because everyone's job, I guess, was tied to this one guy. Interestingly enough, a lot of our team is first-time content writers. We've created this hiring pipeline where we bring people out of the university system, higher ed, as well as English teachers. So like across our editing and writing team, there's like a dozen master's degrees in English literature. There's like a dozen former English teachers. And this has its pros and its cons. The first pro is that these people generally have a passion for language. Like you can't, and what our team looks like is even though they're all non-native speakers, they started speaking English at a young age, either, Western media or like Japanese media, like anime, talking shit in video games, trolling people on forums. All of them started speaking at a very young age. And then as they grew into adults, they kept on pursuing English. They studied it in university. They went on to get their master's and they went on to go teach it. And I'm not like kidding when I say these people are passionate about language. I think most of the people on I'd say 90% of the writers on our team and our editors, they don't care about the business impact that their words going to create. They like to concern themselves with the language and the grammar. And I don't understand it, but I'm glad that there's people who care about content a lot more than I do, because without them it wouldn't work. Because every word of content writing is a liability to mess something up. If you're watching this and you're like, man, I don't really love language and I got a bunch of stuff to do, and one of them being make more money and acquire more revenue, then you need to delegate editing ASAP. Editing was the very first thing I delegated. It was the first full-time role I hired for. It made sense because I wasn't editing. In fact, I was not editing. I was not reading the content before I was publishing it. And so that was the first thing I knew I needed to fix, because the whole strategy is based off of creating more value for the reader than any other page Google could show. Editing is a portion of that. And so I hired an editor first. This allows you to focus on the higher level systems to support that editor. It allows you to go focus on revenue acquisition, allows you to focus on SEO and the things that you haven't been able to delegate yet. Don't hire an external editor. I think your first thought is, oh, I'm going to go hire someone experienced and they're going to do it. But we haven't been able to make it work. And the reason is because the easiest thing for editors and writers to do is let things slide. And the only way that your editors and your writers, especially your editors, aren't going to let things slide is if they care. But the problem is you can't evaluate caring in the editor interview cycle. You might have one or two touch points with this editor. Their resume might say they care. They might say they care in the interview, but you can't actually evaluate whether they care until you hire them and see what they do. In our organization, all of our editors start off as writers. In fact, all of our senior managers, except for one, start off as a writer. Our director of ops started off as a writer. Our executive editors started off as a writer. Our SEOs started off as writers. And the reason is because you can't fake caring for 2 to 4 months before you're promoted from writing to editing. And whoever is your best writer is also going to be a great editor. In the beginning, when you're building your content team, your first instinct is going to be to give your entire workload to as few writers as possible, because writers are hard to manage. People are hard to manage, and you want to manage as few as possible. But it's a mistake, because in the beginning, you need to be focused on building your editor pipeline, and you're going to recruit your editors from your writers. And what you want to do is you want to spread your workload around, and you want to give yourself enough surface area for one of the writers to be clearly better than all the rest, so you can hire them and make them as your editor, because you know their care, you know they're good, and you know that you can delegate a lot of this stuff to them. Our editors edit, and they do a bunch of other things. They have 2 to 3 weekly pod meetings with their writers. They have 3 to 5 meetings a week with their other editors. I think this is just for the social interaction. They like hanging out with each other. I'm not sure how necessary it is. They have one-on-ones. They help with running interviews and evaluating candidate tests. They help with onboarding. They create content series templates, and they do QA for other editors. So we have 1 editor per 2 writers, which when I talk to other people, it's low, but our editors also do a whole bunch of other things too. Now, the type of editor you want is an editor that looks like Gordana. Get yourself a Gordana, because you don't just want an editor. If this whole content velocity thing works for you, you're going to need someone to help you build a team while you go do all these other things that are on your plate. And my first editor, Gordana, was so good that she didn't stay as an editor. She got promoted to content manager and then project manager. And today she's director of ops, running our 45-person content team. My trajectory and my story could have been a lot different if I didn't have Gordana. And the way I found her, again, was very purposeful. She was one of 10 writers I was working with. After 3 or 4 months of working with these writers, I already knew who was the best. And I reached out to her and I brought her on board. It's even easier if the person has talents outside of that and can grow with you and grow with your team, because as the most, the most tenured, the longest they're the best position to keep on getting promoted. But if you don't have that many writers and the person you promote isn't that good, the person won't be equipped to handle that for you, and you're going to run into issues. So the last thing I want to talk about is removing SEO from the SEO process. And I know that sounds funny, but it's true. Like, SEO is a lot easier to do when you don't have to hire SEOs to do it. And when you look at our team, this is how we've kind of grown. We have 40 people on our content team. We have 3 people on our SEO team. One's a virtual assistant that helps out with internal linking. The 2 PMs started off as writers and then editors and now PM. Because when your approach to SEO involves scaling content velocity, it's not very helpful to have SEOs that are technical but can't write. Technical SEOs that don't understand good content. And so it's easier to train a great editor to be a good SEO PM than it is to train a technical SEO into being a good writer. It's just a lot easier. So if you can figure it out, I highly recommend doing SEO without having SEOs. I'll show you 2 really helpful things that enabled this setup in our organization. So before I show it to you, SEO should be focused on building the systems that the content team works within, not doing the work. Our SEOs are not writing meta titles, and they're not optimizing URLs, and they're not choosing the internal links. What they've done is they've created frameworks and process docs and guides for the editors to choose the internal links, for the writers to choose the internal links, for the editors to choose the URLs and the meta titles and the meta optimizations. It's the only way it works, because hiring good SEOs is way harder than hiring good writers. There's only one Boyan, but there's a lot of really good writers out there. Good SEOs are also expensive. The first thing is you want to basically, both of these things are cluster AI. First is automate keyword research with cluster AI. It removes needing SEO skills for doing world-class keyword research. And then the second is optimize your pages based off of cluster AI's deliverables. Let me show you exactly what that looks like. So I prepared an example keyword research report. It's for a direct-to-consumer e-commerce store that sells frozen Wagyu beef. And I want to understand how all the Americans in America are Googling Wagyu beef. And so I drop in Wagyu is the main keyword. And Ahrefs tells me there's 30,000 keywords representing 1.1 million searches a month. This is where you need SEOs, because you need the SEO to come in and determine which keywords can rank together. How many pages of content do you need to create to be able to rank for all the ways that people are searching Wagyu? Well, it's really hard to tell, because it depends on how many keywords go on each page and which keywords go on each page. So the plight of an SEO is they have to take these 30,000 keywords and then they have to come back with a set number of pages of content for you to publish. Now, to make a long story short, SEOs save time by making it up. They go, I think Wagyu beef can rank with Wagyu steak. can rank with A5 Wagyu, and these are all one page, and I'm going to optimize one page for all 3 keywords. I'm going to try and rank for all 3 keywords with one page. Is that true? Well, the way you figure it out is you have to Google each keyword. You have to count the number of results in common. And if there's 3 or more websites that rank for both Wagyu beef and Wagyu steak with the same page, then you can rank for both keywords with the same page. But if there's 2 or less websites that rank for both keywords with one page, you probably can't either. And then you have to do that with all these keywords. I have more content on how badly keyword research is messed up, but it's really screwed up. And so what Cluster AI does is it stops your keyword research here. Literally, all you need to do is type in the main keyword, use the include and excludes if you want, and then export your list. Our keyword research is done. There's no SEO skills required. You just import into Cluster AI, and what you get back is a deliverable that looks like this. And we've taken that list of 30,000 keywords, and we've turned it into a list of unique pages of content that we need to create to rank for all of the ways that people are searching across the funnel for the keywords we discovered. So we have the main keyword. This is the keyword in a group with the most search volume. And then we have every variation that can rank along with the main keyword. These are the keywords that we're going to optimize our content with. Because we don't just want to rank for the main keyword, we want to rank for the main keyword plus all the variations of the main keyword. Now, the way Cluster AI works is that when it compares 2 keywords, basically every variation here has at least 3 results in common on page 1 with the main keyword. So if you were to Google any of these variations in the main keyword, at least 3 other pages are ranking for both keywords with one page, meaning you can too, vice versa for the main keywords. Between any given main keyword, there's 2 or less results in common. And if 2 or less websites can't rank for both keywords with one page, you probably can't either. You should create 2 pages just like everybody else. Okay, cool. Then we get the total search volume that the page is targeting. Because again, the keyword variations oftentimes adds up to more volume than the main keyword alone. And so now we know, I'll show you another example. We have a list of hundreds and hundreds of pages of content that we need to create. Okay, cool. Keyword research is one of the reasons that you need to be an SEO to do SEO, not anymore. Our team of editors is doing keyword research because really you just need to make sure you get the keywords that are revealing all the ways people search, and then you let Cluster AI determine which keywords go on which pages. Now, the second half of this is optimizing your content based off of the Cluster AI deliverables. So we have a very formulaic way that allows our editing team to do SEO optimization during the editing process. So their ultimate agenda is to help the writers create more valuable content than any other page of content Google currently showing. But in the editing phases, they got to do a little bit of stuff. They don't know why they do it, but they know they have to do it to keep Nick happy. And they know that if they do it, their content's going to naturally rank. Here's how it works. If we're writing a page about Wagyu beef, this is the URL. This is the slug. The main keyword is always the slug. A5 Wagyu would be the slug. The main keyword always goes in the metadata, plus something clickbait. In the H1, it's the main keyword plus something clever. We use the variations within the content in the H2s, and then we just sprinkle them in. If a writer's writing an article about Wagyu beef, chances are they're going to use the exact word Wagyu beef like 900 times within the article. And our editor's job is they go in and they just change that word from Wagyu beef to one of the variations within this. So when a writer writes Wagyu beef, they might say Wagyu beef steak. And when a writer writes Wagyu beef, they might say Wagyu beef USA. They see this H2. They see this as an H2. Where can I buy Wagyu beef? And what is Wagyu beef? So we look for keywords that are very clear H2s and that are answering a question that a reader will have. But a lot of these variations are just like almost exactly the same thing. And then we'll just use them as variations of the main keyword and sprinkle them throughout the content. And that means none of our editors need to know SEO. They have this template, main keyword goes here, variations go here, do it, naturally ranks, we're good to go. So I have a bunch more tactical detail on how to rank better in Google. And like, basically, if you're like, man, I really like what he said about that, I just wish he had spent more time talking about it. Chances are I already have on these URLs. 0 to 1.5 million covers our case study. Fastest SEO results goes super deep into content velocity, how Google works, shares how and why I believe that good content is all you need to rank within the Google search results. I'm publishing a ton of content in 2022. I'm making everything that's made me successful available. And if you want it as soon as it's live, follow me on LinkedIn, join our Facebook community. We have over 4,000 content-focused marketers. We have AMAs from marketers at brands like Shopify and Intercom and Coinbase and Quora and folks like Rand Fishkin. Jump on our YouTube channel. We're going hard on YouTube. There's a lot more bandwidth to communicate ideas and information there than our written content. And then check out all of our playbooks on workello.com playbooks. We have a playbook for rolling out documentation in your organization. We have a playbook for meeting recaps. We have a ton of playbooks, all for free, that'll help you grow your remote team. I also recommend you take a look at Workello. You can sign up for free. You can use the product. You can get unlimited candidates. You can send unlimited writing tests, and you can view up to 5 completed writing tests for free. It just works. It abstracts away everything, and within a couple hours, a couple days, you'll have hundreds of candidates. And we have a special offer for SEO Mastery Summit attendee. While you're purchasing, type in SEOM22 when you're prompted for the coupon code, and you'll get 10% off. My name is Nick Jordan, founder of Workello, founder of Content Distribution. This has been how to scale a content team to more than 100 pages a month. I hope you had as much fun as I did. Thank you so much for your time. See you online.